In this lesson, we're going to get back into actually doing some stuff, and we're going to create those terrains, that foliage terrain and that grass terrain that we talked about the last 2 lectures. So let's go into Unity. And we have to make sure that we are level set here. And I did some things in here, and you guys may have done some things in here, but you should be back to this situation where things are clashing again. So maybe your OPCD meshes, remember we raised this up before by 0.25 so we could see it clearly while we were doing our some previous things. Well, let's put that back to 0. Okay, so it's clashing with our inner. We got that Z fighting going on. And then if you did any playing around with like the trees, if you had been following along with me, just make sure that in here, if the trees, make sure there's no trees. If there are, highlight them, click edit, remove trees. Same thing with the grasses. Let's get rid of any grasses that you have in there because we don't want anything planted on our main inner terrain. And then this cogwheel, let's make sure that the base terrain draw is on. Remember, if we turn it off, it becomes invisible. And let's make sure this time we're going to make sure that our tree and detail object, we're now going to turn that off because we do not ever want to plant on our inner terrain anymore. We want to plant on our foliage and our grasses. So let's turn that off. Now let's go into our terrain backup folder, and you'll see in here that we've got our 2 height maps. We've got our inner and our outer. And we want to duplicate that inner. We want to make a copy of it. And we're going to use that copy. We're going to make 2 copies actually. One's going to be for our foliage terrain. One's going to be for our grass terrain. Right? So if we highlight our inner, we come up here to edit, duplicate. Now it's going to make an exact copy of that. And then on that copy, so it added a 1 to it, we're going to rename it, and I'm just going to call this one foliage. Okay. And I'm also going to create another copy. So I'm going to highlight the inner again, edit, duplicate. And now I've got this one. I'm going to rename it, right click, rename, and I call this grasses. So now we have 3 height maps that are exactly the same. We've got inner, grasses, and foliage, and they are all the exact same. They have the exact same data associated with them. Okay. Now, if you remember before, how do we create a terrain out of these? Well, we need to drag them into our scene. So let's take foliage, let's drag it into our scene and drop it. And you can see the name now becomes terrain. So now we've got 2 terrains out here. We've got our inner and another one called terrain. And we can see that we've got, for this terrain, we've got base draw on. And if we come over here, we can see that we've got the same textures that were there before. So we've got this texture, we've got the other things that we're using to draw with earlier. So let's come back over here to grasses, and let's move grasses over too. Well, now we got 2 terrains, the same name. How do we know which one's different? I should rename these, right? So let me click on this one. And if I come over here to this little brush and I go down, you can see here under the terrain collider that this is using the foliage height map, if I hit it, as its height map data. So I know that this one is foliage. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to rename it as foliage. And you can see if I go down to the next one, this one is linked back to grasses. All right. And we're going to rename this one grasses. So now we have 3 terrains and they're all visible. And we got all kinds of fighting going on here now. We got our inner that is showing. We've got our meshes, which are showing. We've got a foliage terrain, which is being drawn and showing. And we've got a grasses terrain, which is on, showing, and being drawn. Now, remember what we talked about in these other lessons. Inner, we're going to always show our inner because it'll get lowered under our meshes, but the outside here mesh is always going to be shown. So we're going to leave draw on, but we're going to make sure that tree and detail objects are disabled because we're never going to draw on the inner main terrain. Let's go down to foliage. Foliage, we should be turning it off because we do not want to draw it, right? We want it to be invisible, but we are going to draw our trees on it for now. We're going to draw our trees on it, but once we move them to game objects, we'll disable that, but we're going to leave it on now because we do want to plant trees on this layer. Same thing with grasses, right? We're going to turn draw off and we're going to leave detail objects on. So now if we come back here to enter, if we turn this off, things should disappear and we should see nothing except for our meshes. Perfect. Okay. Let's leave this off just so I can show you. Let's go to foliage. I'm going to turn foliage on and now we have a train again, but it's our foliage train. We don't want to show that one. Let's leave it off and grass is back on. Keep that in mind that at any given time, you can come back here and you can turn these on so you can see them, and it helps troubleshooting if you're planting something and you're not exactly sure where it got planted or why it's on a different layer. You can always come back here and turn these draws on and off to give you a good idea of where your foliage and grass terrain's on. Okay, so let's go back. Let's turn our inner on. Again, draws off, foliage draws off, but tree and detail objects are on, and same thing with grasses. All set.